I'm Sarah Heiner, and welcome to the Health and Happiness Show. I'm Sarah Heiner, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's see what else I always have to tell you about. I've got a library of videos that are going on in the Facebook videos. We also have it on YouTube, so come on over to YouTube. If you miss any video, you want to share this with a friend, which sharing is always a great idea. Especially today, since we're talking about the COVID vaccines. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of family and friends that have these questions every day. Every topic is, did you get vaccinated? Didn't you get vaccinated? How did you feel about it? So we're going to go through that today and try and ease some of the confusion that's going on in the headlines. What else do I have to tell you? In the chat box, as always, ask your questions in the chat box. Someone will be sending me questions. So put anything in the chat box, questions that you have, and pass them along to me so that we can ask them of Dr. Max. And also in the downloads, don't forget, we have these free great downloads for you to all get more information and share these as well. One about boosting your immune, your best defense against anything. Vaccines are important, masks are important, but a strong immune system, having your body working at its optimal, letting it do what it knows how to do, because our bodies are fascinating creatures. So free download of some great bottom line information on that, and also about pain. A little sitting around too much. There's a lot of chronic pain. Stress leads to chronic pain. Sitting leads to chronic pain. So take advantage of those, download them, again, share them. This is, again, just bottom line's gift to the world. All right, with that, let's talk about vaccines. Let me invite on my dear friend and so respected mentor, Dr. Max Gomez. Hello.
Hey, Sarah, how are you?
I am good. Let me tell everyone how great you are. If anyone that doesn't know Max, Max is a 9-time Emmy Award-winning medical journalist. He's known and loved by New Yorkers for decades. He's currently and has been for years on CBS TV in New York. He has received the Excellence in a Time of Crisis Award from the New York City Department of Health for his coverage following the 9/11 attacks. He was a moderator. This is a real passion project for him on stem cell research. He was a moderator of the 4th International Vatican Conference, Unite to Cure, How Science, Technology, and 21st Century Medicine Will Impact Culture and Society. And that was all about stem cell research. And that's, we've talked about stem cells before. One day we'll have to talk about them again in terms of, because there's so much constant stuff going on.
Changing. Mm-hmm.
And as I said, like Max is one of the smartest people I know. He just knows everything. He's really taught me a lot. I value his friendship. And you can learn more about him at drmaxgomez.com. So, vaccines.
Hi. Yes.
Vaccines. First, we need the vaccines. And then the vaccines come out. And then now
we don't have enough.
Huh?
And now we don't have enough.
Well, we don't have enough vaccines, but the vaccines aren't going to still help you, and you still need a mask. And the number of questions and the amount of confusion over this, it's not, I think it's helping, but oh my gosh, the poor people out there and all of us poor people that are trying to figure out, should you get it, shouldn't you get it? It literally, I think there's not a person I talk to, a conversation I have, where they're not going, did you get it? Should you get it? People are constantly emailing me, Sarah, what do you think? And honestly, it's up to, there's so many individual decision trees for people to take. So let's literally go run down. We're going to run down a lot of these areas of confusion and try and ease their burden.
Okay.
Okay. And I have to apologize to everybody. I'm looking at myself. I'm very blue. I apologize. I'm not in my normal place, and I have light coming in that makes me blue. So I apologize. That's actually what natural light is. You know how they talk about UV rays? You're seeing it on me. Max looks great and healthy. I look blue. All right.
And I have to apologize for what looks like a couple of things sticking out of my head or shoulder. That's I'm broadcasting from what's become our home gym over here. So that's part of an elliptical behind me. So nobody's aiming a gun at me. We're safe.
It looks like a giant magnet. One of those, when they have the bad guys of the world with the magnets aiming to collect all of whatevers. All right, let's get to vaccines.
Okay.
Now that shot around the cast a little. All right, side effects. First and foremost, let's talk about side effects. That there's fevers and pain and all of that, and then there are reports about severe side effects and some people dying. So what's normal and what's not normal? And right, so let's try and tease that out, because everything has side effects, and none of this is uncommon necessarily.
Right. Everything has side effects. Every vaccine has side effects. And also vaccines, the side effects are an indication that your immune system is responding to the vaccine. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Everybody responds a little bit differently, just like everybody has different reaction to medications or just about anything else. So the common one, the most common one, obviously, is a soreness in the arm. It hurts where you got the
Doctor, it
shot.
hurts when I do this.
Don't do that. So so that's number one. Feeling, I actually have gotten my vaccines.
Mhm.
I've gotten both of the Moderna vaccines.
Mhm.
Almost no reaction after the first one, which is common,
Mhm.
and a worse reaction after the second one, which is also common.
Right.
And
Find your worst.
say again.
What was your worst?
Um, I had the sore arm. It was funny. Took more than 24 hours for it to show up.
Mhm.
24, almost 30 hours or so to show up. I just felt crummy. I felt off, a little tired. Took a couple of ibuprofen, took a nap, felt better.
Yeah. So my
Then,
mom had her second one, had a very similar thing. She woke
Mhm.
up like first one, no problem. Second one, and my mom is 89 years old. So
Mm.
second one, she woke up in the middle of the night, had a headache, and she never gets headaches.
Mhm.
Took an Advil, took a something, and then was fine the next day. And again,
Right.
that's your body. Like when you get those kind of symptoms of being sick, it's because your immune system is doing what it knows how to do, which is fight with
Exactly.
fight the foreigner.
Exactly. And then later on that evening, I felt like a little chilled, like I was running maybe a low fever. My fancy thermometer broke, so I couldn't tell for sure whether I had a fever or not. Again, a couple of ibuprofen, went to bed, got a good night's sleep, fine.
Right.
So no problem. Now, and those you'll see.
And that's standard,
Very
and
common.
people shouldn't be alarmed by any of that.
No, not at all. The reports of deaths after a vaccine are really hard to make something out of at this point. When you vaccinate millions of people, unfortunately, some people are going to die in that time frame around the time that they got the vaccine. That doesn't mean that the vaccine caused it.
What
We
about if
don't
they're
know
dying
that.
from something that seems totally unrelated, like they just
Right.
suddenly die?
Right. I mean, we always hear stories of people who went to their doctor, they got a clean bill of health, walked out on the street and had a heart attack and died.
Yep.
You know, it happens. It's not great, obviously, but that sort of thing happens. So we don't know what to do about that. We haven't really seen, other than the only serious allergic reaction, really, or reaction that we've seen is a serious allergic reaction. And that's why they make you wait 15 minutes or so after you get the shot to make sure that you don't develop an anaphylactic reaction.
Is there,
And
go ahead.
and that really just happens. We've really only seen that in people who have known severe allergies,
I
whether
was
it's
gonna ask you,
to,
is there anything, again, unique in these vaccines? And for the most part, at this moment in time, we're talking just about the Pfizer and the Moderna. Those are the only ones that are approved for the US.
for now, right?
Is there any unique ingredients in these vaccines relative to other vaccines that people might be allergic to?
Well, it's hard to say that they'd be any more allergic to. It's definitely a different vaccine. They use a little chunk of messenger RNA. It's a nucleic acid. It's the messenger that takes the information from DNA out to the cell, to the machinery and the rest of the cell out of the nucleus, where it makes these spike proteins, and that's what the immune system is going to react to. And they're encapsulated in tiny little nanoparticles of lipid, of fat,
Right.
basically. So it's hard to understand why that would be any more so, other than you would to any other vaccine or a bug bite or a bee sting or that sort of thing, or in some cases medications.
And the percentages of these allergic reactions are, again, not higher than is happening with other vaccines, is my understanding.
No, and the numbers are tiny. I mean, in 30,000, I think 15,000 that actually who actually got the vaccine. In Pfizer, I believe they had 3.
Is there anyone who would out of the blue have an allergic reaction relative to, I'm trying to think, how would you know? I mean, so that there are a lot of people that have a lot of allergies, they're very sensitive to all sorts of different things. So they might automatically know that they're sensitive to stuff and
True.
be very careful and, they might have their own EpiPen. Or is
Right.
there anything else? Is there any way that anyone would know that if you're sensitive to, I'm making this up, strawberries, right? I mean,
Right.
total made up. Don't say Sarah Heiner's strawberry allergies. That somebody might know that they have to be aware or alert.
If you have any allergies, you might want to be a little more alert.
Mhm.
If you've ever been told to carry an EpiPen, then you definitely need to be on the alert and definitely let whoever's giving the vaccine know that you've had potentially serious allergic reactions in the past. What most people don't realize is you don't have a serious allergic reaction to your first bug bite.
Mhm.
The first one sensitizes you, and it's the second, third, or 20th bite that you have the bad reaction to. So if you haven't had any allergic reactions before, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have one reaction or an allergic reaction to this. But nevertheless, they'll make you sit for 15 minutes just to make sure you're not short of breath, you're not breaking out in hives, you're not starting to itch or whatever. And there's one other, it's not really an adverse reaction, but it's a reaction that women need to know about when it comes to the vaccine. And this is just starting to cut, well, there's 2 actually different ones. One I just did a story on for CBS in New York, and the other one is just starting to come out now. The one that would be of more concern is, again, because of vaccine, your immune system is reacting. You get it in the arm. The first stop for the immune system and for these foreign antigens are the lymph nodes in your armpit.
Mhm.
Women who have a mammogram, shortly after having had the vaccine, their nodes may show up as enlarged on the mammogram.
Right.
And then suddenly,
Right.
there's a lot of concern there. Again, that's a normal reaction. You need, if you've had recently any vaccine, not just the COVID vaccine,
Right. So your lymph nodes do it.
you should know, you should let the mammographer or the radiologist know about that. And the recommendation is, if you've had the vaccine, wait a few weeks before having your mammogram, but that's only if you will actually have it in a few weeks, because what happens is I'll put it off a few weeks and then next thing you know, it's a year or 2 later and you haven't had that. So that's now showing up in the literature.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, which is not as serious, is that people, men and women, who have had facial fillers, cosmetic facial fillers, and then they have a vaccine. And again, it can happen with any vaccine, but it's now, because everybody's hypervigilant about the COVID vaccine, it causes swelling in the areas where you've had the filler. Again, your immune system is reacting to foreign stuff, and it's looking around and it says, wait a minute, this is the good news there. It's transient.
Right.
It's treatable actually with some anti-inflammatory, like ibuprofen, an anti-inflammatory will knock it down. If for some reason it gets really bad, you'll get a little oral steroid or something, but it goes away usually in a few hours or 24 hours or something. So it's not a big deal, but don't panic. Know that that's a possibility.
Interesting. Somebody asked a question about a shellfish allergy, that her father has a shellfish allergy. Would that be an issue?
Any allergy is potentially an issue. Shellfish allergy sometimes can be serious. So again, you just have to be aware of it. It doesn't disqualify you from getting a vaccine, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get a vaccine, because you should, even with an allergy.
Right.
But you just have to be cautious and aware of it. And again, alert whoever is giving you the vaccine that you're allergic to, shellfish, strawberries, fruit, whatever.
And then, as you said earlier, that everybody has unique biochemistry. and everybody's on unique combinations of medications, or they have whatever their personal health issues or challenges are. And historically, vaccines are tested with mass amounts of people over very long amounts of periods of time. This was tested with tens of thousands of people, and we have not had the benefit, and we're going to talk a little bit about next about effectiveness and how long this lasts. We don't yet have the benefit of all of that knowledge. So
Right.
with every health decision that you make, every medication, every vaccine, everything, you never know how something will react, particularly on your body, especially when it's new, be it a new medication, a new vaccine, a new treatment, a new surgery, a new anything.
Mhm. So, and that said, Sarah, what is important also for people to realize, the vaccine trials that were run on about the same number that phase 3 clinical trials on vaccines usually are run. But 30,000 people is not the same as 30 million people.
Right.
And so when you really start rolling it out, we always see unusual reactions that didn't show up at all in 30,000 people, but you're giving it now to millions and millions of people. So again, it's not surprising if we start hearing about some unusual reactions. The other thing that people are often very concerned about is this was developed too fast. We don't know enough about it. True. That's the good news, actually, because this is a whole brand new platform
Yep.
for vaccines.
The mRNA is versus
The mRNA
other formats, right.
Vaccines are. The other vaccines that are in the pipeline actually use more platforms, viruses and things that have been genetically engineered that have been around for a while.
More traditional.
And they've been used for different things, Ebola, Zika, et cetera, so that we know more about those, but they're still in clinical trials. So the fact that it came around quickly is good because we need them.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like they are actually extraordinarily safe.
Yeah, it's great news. Let me just say, I've got some questions coming in and I'm thrilled. Keep putting them in. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold them to the end so that we can get a lot of the key information out, and then we'll cycle back. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right, cool. You mentioned one more thing while we're talking about side effects and stuff. You mentioned you're taking pain relievers after the fact. One thing the CDC warns about is taking pain relievers before the vaccine.
Pre-medicating or
Right,
preloading.
exactly. I don't want to get a pain in my arm.
Right. It's a lot better than, getting pneumonia and ending up in the hospital. Yeah, it's theoretical. It looks like there's some evidence that it might blunt the immune response immediately afterwards. But aside from that, if you're really feeling crummy a day or 2 days later or something, don't overdo it. But as a close friend of mine who's an immunologist at Yale said, he made an executive decision when he was feeling crummy a day later, and he took his ibuprofen.
Yeah, after the fact is fine. Again, it's just people understanding that when your body has a fever, it's supposed to have a fever. It's having it for a reason.
That's how the body reacts. Exactly.
Right, exactly. So it's okay. And you want to help your body, give your body all the tools it can to be able to do the job that it needs to do. I will say about that pain in the arm, if somebody out there, all my bottom line people, can please we just published an article about how to reduce the pain in your arm. So if we
an ice pack?
No, beforehand, it's like you rub it, you squeeze it and you rub it. So, it's kind of like, all right, I'll hurt it here so it doesn't hurt, right? So it numbs it a little. I don't remember if there's ice pack in it, but we just published that article. So can somebody please put that link into the chat so that everybody can download that? Hopefully it's available on the website. If not, I'm going to have people scurrying really fast right now and they're cursing me out. All right, let's talk about effectiveness. Because these overall, again, Pfizer and Moderna knocked it out of the park in terms of what the effectiveness is on these relative. They were hoping they were going to be 50 and 60%, and at 90, 95%, they're very effective.
Exactly. And with apparently very, very few potential side effects. Sorry about the ambulance going by on the street outside.
That's, I got construction workers across the street. Like, well, life at home is so fascinating, isn't it? Look how adaptable we have to be.
So the FDA had originally said that if vaccines hit 60%, they would consider that probably acceptable, depending on the side effect profile, for approval. But it got into the 90s with Moderna and Pfizer. And again, they are virtually identical vaccines. The only difference is the little lipid shell or nanoparticle that they're in is a little different. But the code, the mRNA that's inside that little nanoparticle, they're identical. So the fact that they got that high is really remarkable. And they get that kind of effectiveness with very, very few side effects.
So let me ask you a question. How is effectiveness measured for this? Because one of the things down the road, and we're going to talk about, is long-term coverage, right? Because there's like, yeah, even if you had the vaccine, then you still need to wear masks, and the antibodies covering. If you got sick, you still need it. So how are they really measuring effectiveness on this? And is that an adequate measure at this moment in time?
There are a couple of endpoints, and the different companies are using slightly different endpoints here to measure this. And backing up a little bit, the fact that there was so much COVID circulating around the world, particularly in the areas where these clinical trials were being done, is also what helped accelerate the results. If you are giving a vaccine for something that's relatively rare, you have to wait a very long time to see whether fewer people who got the placebo got sick than people who got the actual vaccine. So the main endpoint for most of these has been, for effectiveness, is did they get sick? Did they get COVID?
The two groups, how many people got sick? They didn't intentionally expose them to it. They just let them back to their life.
Right. They didn't know, it's double blind.
Right.
Some got a placebo, some got the actual active vaccine. And then you turn them loose. You say, I mean, obviously, if you're going to wear a mask, whatever it is that you normally do. And then they compare how many people got sick in the vaccine group versus the placebo group. Now, secondarily, for example, Johnson & Johnson, the Janssen vaccine from J&J, they've also been looking at effectiveness in terms of reducing serious disease, meaning hospitalization and death.
Wouldn't they all do the same thing if your immune system is heightened sensitivity to it?
You would think, but not necessarily. Not necessarily until you can actually prove that. You can't actually say that. For example, also the J&J vaccine says that it is effective at reducing transmission. So just because you've been vaccinated and you don't end up in the hospital or dying, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be harboring or be a reservoir of virus. It may not be making you sick, but all of us actually carry a lot of different viruses and bacteria, particularly in our nasal passages, that we've come to a truce with. You know, we have a ceasefire.
Right.
But certain things might activate it in a way that could still make us sick, or we could transmit it. So that's what these vaccines now are trying to demonstrate, that they actually prevent the transmission.
So J&J is talking about that. Pfizer and Moderna, do they have any, is there any reason to believe that they don't similarly have a similar effect?
It all depends on how, they structure the trial, what endpoints are looking for.
How to lie with statistics.
And so forth, right.
And I don't mean like how to structure a research study.
Right.
Right. And I want to talk later actually about this, again, this perception of, we're going to talk about, even if you've been vaccinated, can you transmit it? And, the whole future perception of it, because we all have schmutz up our nose all the time, right? Like of all sorts of stuff. Like this is, I can't say this enough. COVID is unique, but it's not. I mean, it's right in terms of there's billions of germs that are out there. And this
Oh,
is,
yeah, and we are
we are
being
all exposed.
bombarded with
Right.
them constantly. And
Well,
our immune system is responding every day to hundreds, if not thousands of different challenges.
right. And there's wacky bacteria, virus, all sorts of stuff that comes out of the blue. I had a cousin years ago, healthy young guy in his 30s, caught something and tragically died soon after. You can't, like, it's sad, and I don't know why else he might have been vulnerable to it, whatever it is, but this is our planet. I mean, this is life as we know it. So it's interesting what COVID has done to people in terms of fears. There have been news about breakthrough cases for vaccinated people.
Mhm.
Again, how unique is that to COVID, or how normal is that for vaccines? And are they creating something, creating a headline on something that's totally normal?
It's totally normal. No vaccine is 100%, right? 90%, 95% is excellent, but some people will still, again, because everybody's immune system responds differently. And so you may have a good, strong response and someone else may not respond as well. And so when they are faced with whether it's a coronavirus or polio or anything else, it might still break through.
Right.
The
So
other
it's
thing,
breakthrough, or they simply got sick?
well, they got sick.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. Yeah, they got sick. And the other thing is we don't know yet how long the immunity lasts.
Yeah, we're going to talk
And
about that next. Yes.
I know, I knew you were going there.
I'm going there. Yes.
That's the other issue. You may not respond, you may not be a strong responder. So you can't necessarily say I'm 95% protected. You are probably well protected, but that doesn't mean that you can't get sick. And again, that's the case with virtually any vaccine out there. In fact, if you are going into areas where there is still wild polio
Mhm.
or wild measles, and you are an adult and it's been, decades since you got your childhood vaccines, the CDC and many others recommend a booster to make sure that your immune system is still primed to respond to polio or measles or whatever else may be out there, depending on where you're going.
Right. So let's, as long as we open the door, let's talk about this now. We'll rearrange. So they don't know how long the antibodies will last and the protection will last. Again, because of the uniqueness, and again, the mRNA is a new, unique technology. But is it because of that, or is it with, again, any new vaccine? I mean, when they first introduced the Gardasil for HPV, they didn't necessarily know how long that coverage would be. Is that a similar thing going on?
That's not only the case for virtually all vaccines until it's been out there for years or decades. It's also the case for wild infection, meaning a natural infection. If you get COVID and recover, you have most of the time antibodies, although if you have a very mild case, your antibody titer, the level of antibodies, may not be all that high. What we don't know is how long those antibodies will last. They probably are not long lasting, the antibodies themselves.
With the antibodies from the vaccine, or the antibodies from having been sick?
The antibodies from having been sick. We don't know for sure from the antibodies from the vaccine. It looks like the vaccine induces a much stronger response, immune response, than a natural infection or wild type infection.
So,
So
but what is different if I've had Epstein-Barr, if I had mono, or if I had chickenpox? Obviously, you used to have chickenpox parties. That produces theoretically a long-term response. What's unique about coronavirus? Or again, is it just that they don't know?
coronaviruses do seem to be different.
Mm-hmm.
SARS and MERS, two very deadly coronaviruses
Right.
seem to, antibodies there, and presumably the immunity there seems to wane with time. So every virus is a little bit different.
Mhm.
In some cases, a lot different,
Right.
depending on their makeup, their mutations, and so forth. So we don't know how long, but by just measuring your antibodies after a person's gotten sick, we have an idea of how long they last, the antibodies. But what we're measuring tend to be a kind of a gamish, a mixture of different antibodies. And we don't know how many of those will actually be what they call neutralizing.
Right.
So the key here is that you want to induce what are called memory cells and cellular immunity. There are two kinds of immunity. There's antibody immunity and cellular immunity. And it's actually
And are there, is
a
that
lot.
the T cells that have the cellular immunity, right?
Yeah, they're the killer cells, but they also are helper cells that say they've got the memory, and they're circulating around carrying the wanted poster from the post office that has a coronavirus on it. If they come across a coronavirus, they're the canary in the coal mine, in a sense. They start alerting everybody.
All revered. Hey, you guys.
Yep. There's a bad guy here. We need to, call in the troops.
Mhm.
And they do. And that is why, this is the next thing that you were about to ask me, is why do you need two shots?
Well, because they're showing Pfizer's now saying, actually reporting that one is 90% effective, I think, after one dose of 21 days.
Right. And that's based on small numbers
Mhm.
and looking at antibody titers. I'm not ready to forego my second shot
Mhm.
and trust in the first shot.
But but we're getting a little cyclical. I mean, this is the confusion that's out there though, Max. So one shot seems to be 90% effective. Okay. Two shots, 95% coverage. Okay. I don't want to forego my second shot, which is more painful, gives me a worse reaction. Okay. But we still don't know how long that's effective anyway. And you might need another one in the future.
Well,
In which
true.
case you go, well, why bother having the second one now?
But it's not just another 5%.
Right.
That second shot is what consolidates the T cell immunity that will be longer lasting than just antibodies alone.
So the vaccine is not only, we always talk about the antibodies, but the vaccines actually do help your body produce the antibodies and these T cell alarm systems in your
Right.
body. But they
Right.
don't, but again, we don't know how long that's going to last for the T cell and the antibodies, or does it not matter? If you have the T cells, then do you need the antibodies? Because the T cells are the ones that are recognizing it.
Right. And they tell the B cells, I know this gets complicated, they're the ones that make the antibodies.
Right.
So the T cells, in addition to some of them being killer cells,
Right.
the others are the alert, the Paul Revere cells that go around screaming, the virus is coming. And you then get the B cells start making the antibodies. So you get both, you need or you want preferably both effects.
So at this moment in time, because we've gone around a little, if I get my 2 shots of Pfizer or my 2 shots of Moderna, it is boosting my T cells and my antibodies, but we don't know how long it's going to last.
Right. It's boosting the antibodies for sure in the short term.
Right.
That's what Pfizer and others have looked at after one shot. What is it? What do we got? So it boosts those, which will give you some protection right away. These antibodies are neutralizing, presumably. They attach to the little spike proteins on the virus and keep it from actually attaching to the cells in your body. What takes a little longer, and you need that second boost. The first shot is a primer. The second one is the one that brings it all together and presumably induces this cellular, longer lasting immunity. Again, we don't know how long it lasts until we see how long it lasts.
And then again, but for people who have been sick, where they're saying if you've been sick, you should still get that vaccine because
That's the
you don't know
recommendation.
how long, then is that, okay, so I'll ask a dirty question. Is that politics? Is that medical industry politics and business? Or is that, again, for realsies, do they really know? And should somebody, before jumping in, I got sick, before jumping into the vaccine line, should I get my antibodies tested and see if I have adequate levels of antibodies?
So here's what the CDC recommends. First of all, they don't recommend antibody testing before getting a vaccine.
Why not? Couldn't I? I
Because
did that before I gave my kids their second chickenpox vaccine.
Because they don't necessarily tell you what you really want it to tell you. It'll tell you you've got antibodies, but that doesn't tell you whether these antibodies are truly the neutralizing antibodies and or whether or not, I mean, you got tons of antibodies circulating in your system all the time. And again, you don't know whether they're truly the neutralizing ones.
So they can't, the tests at this moment in time aren't able to test for the presence of COVID-19 antibodies, except for the fact that they are testing them because they're testing them with the vaccines. I'm sorry to press on this, but
it gets to be a very sophisticated and expensive and hard to do to really check the antibodies that are going to be very specific for that spike protein. But in any case, they're going to go away. That's what the CDC recommendation is if you have had COVID, you've been diagnosed, you tested positive on what's called the PCR test, the nasal swab test, then you can wait up to 90 days or so is what they're saying, because that's kind of what it looks like in the studies. Your immunity from antibodies is going to go down.
well, they don't want you to get the vaccine too quickly though, because they don't want to create an extreme response as well. So there's a fine line. Don't you have to also wait a certain amount of time?
Yeah, but it's not a long time. They want you to be free of symptoms,
Right.
and preferably your 14-day quarantine so that you really are clear. And then you don't have to wait the 90 days, but you need to be clear of your symptoms, because then, you could induce a much stronger and unpleasant reaction. So you don't have to wait 90 days, but if you can't get one for 90 days, I said, you're okay. You most likely have enough immunity to protect yourself until you can get the shots that will really give you what we hope and is believed, a longer lasting immunity.
And they are saying actually that those who have been sick, when they get the vaccine, they get a more powerful response in terms of developing the antibodies.
Right, not surprising.
All right, so here's my next dirty question, because you love when I ask these.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been sick and they don't know how long your protection is going to last,
right,
then why are we talking about herd immunity? Because herd immunity by definition is you've been exposed to all of this. You have some levels of antibodies in your body. You have levels of T cells that say, aha, I recognize that. That's the whole point of herd immunity. But what we're saying now, if the antibodies don't last, that totally flies in the face of the concept of herd immunity. Go.
No, because if you've gotten the vaccine, or if you've gotten.
Well, we're talking, Dr. Macri had a big op-ed in the Wall Street Journal talking about very closely approaching herd immunity across the country, that there are a lot of people who have probably been exposed that don't realize it, at least at a low level. And again, that's how we develop immunity to things, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you want your kids out, I'll joke, eating some dirt, right? Little kids need to be out collecting germs. That's what exercises our immune systems. Right. And there've been frightening studies about kids that are raised in a bubble who have had horrible illness, like really bad illness, with all that protectiveness. Like, we need to be out there. So that's how we develop that immunity, right? So Macri's saying we probably have, we're getting very close to have that herd immunity, whether you agree with him or not, but that's through all that exposure. So then we've got some people sick, some people have been sick and they didn't realize they were sick, some people who just get schmutz in their nose and their T cells go, oh, okay, I'm going to put that in my memory banks. But what you're saying is if none of that lasts, then we'll never have herd immunity because we're going to be constantly chasing our tail, which is really scary, Max.
Herd immunity, well, the number for herd immunity, 60, 70% is kind of the number that's been thrown around out there. It's kind of an educated guess, first of all. We don't really know what number we need to get to for herd immunity for the coronavirus. And it's different for every virus.
Right.
For measles, you need way into the 90 percentile to really get herd immunity because it is so infectious. With all of the people who may have been infected, didn't realize it or had a mild case, true, we don't know how long that will last and whether their antibodies will last for very long or whether they, from their wild infection, if you will, have developed enough long-lasting immunity, T cell immunity, for it to truly contribute to the herd immunity.
Right.
So that's why the whole concept of herd immunity, letting the virus run wild on its own and not worry about it, we just don't know how effective that would be, number one. And number two, a certain percentage of people are going to get very sick and die. And if we're talking about 60, 70% of 330 million people need to be infected,
Mm-hmm.
and X percent of that will, even with improved hospital care, and the death rate has gone down significantly from what it was a year ago. You're still looking at probably a couple of million people dead.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of just letting it run wild, we don't know. And it does look like we have that the vaccine induces a stronger and longer lasting immunity.
Okay, I'll get off of this, but you can see my confusion. I desperately, right? I mean, it really, there is this interesting contradiction because we've been talking about herd immunity, but then when you talk about but the antibodies don't last, well, then we're going to, it's just going to be this constant change.
But the T cell immunity will at least, hopefully, we believe, will last, and that contributes to herd immunity.
Okay. So, and if you've had the vaccine, or if you've had some level of herd immunity, if you've had some bodies, should I get it again? Do I have a diminished response to it? Like a lighter case? If you've had some exposure before?
Almost certainly.
Right. So it's not, so even that you might get it again, but it's not as scary as it is now. And again, reminding everybody, doctors are knowing far better how to treat this as well. Mm-hmm. So it's been a combination of the vaccines, but also doctors are learning so much about how to treat this.
All right. The death rate is down for sure.
I'm talking so long. I'm going to keep going. And hopefully you can hang with me. We might go a little bit long, everybody, but I know this is such an important topic. Is there anyone in particular who should not get the vaccine beyond those who are currently sick or have been recently exposed to COVID? Because they don't want you, if you're currently sick, to be able to get it. I know Pfizer is currently testing pregnant women. Historically, they tell pregnant women not to get new things. And yet I know they've been having pregnant women get this.
There were a small handful of pregnant women who got pregnant and who had gotten the vaccine in the Pfizer trial. Mm-hmm. They did fine. A new study just came out that said there was no increase in miscarriages mm-hmm. in women who had gotten vaccinated. There is no evidence that it goes against or that it impacts fertility. There was there still is out there a sort of an internet meme going around that it affects fertility. It was a theoretical thing because there's a protein and antigen in the placenta that is similar to the protein that the vaccine goes against, and so there was a theory that it would cause miscarriages or infertility. There's no evidence of that. that is one of those tough questions. It's a risk benefit because you're taking a risk in that you're getting the vaccine that hasn't really been fully vetted in pregnant women.
And they don't yet know if there will be any impact on the fetus, on the baby.
Unlikely, again, that part is unlikely, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the flip side of that is if a woman who is pregnant gets COVID,
Mm-hmm.
that could be very serious as well. There are a number of viral infections that, particularly if a woman gets it in the first trimester, can lead to some serious birth defects.
Right.
So, that's a tough one to call until we have more data. If the woman has some underlying health conditions that puts her at higher risk for bad outcomes from a COVID infection,
Mm-hmm.
then that kind of tilts the scales towards getting the vaccine.
So someone diabetic or obese or things like that are the higher risk groups.
Exactly.
Got
Yeah.
it. Anyone else? There was a question that somebody asked about autoimmune. Anything with people that have autoimmune, can they get the vaccine? I think the CDC says yes.
Yes. There doesn't seem to be any reason for people with autoimmune not to get it. Likewise, people who are immunocompromised
Mm-hmm.
can get it.
Like a cancer patient.
The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. Now, the vaccines that use viruses as a vector, we might want to be a little more careful, although the J&J vaccine uses a impaired virus,
Right.
that supposedly can't multiply. But when you put in these what are called attenuated viruses into somebody who is immunocompromised, that could be an issue. But in general, they also say, the CDC says people with HIV can get and should get the vaccine. The only problem there, and the problem is not that the vaccine will cause a problem, is that your immune system may not respond as well or as strongly to the vaccine as a person with a normal or stronger immune system.
Gotcha. So based on what you were saying, I've got emails, I've got a long list of questions, Max, coming in. They're loving what you have to say. That right now, the only vaccines available are these mRNAs. But once these other vaccines with the other technologies come in, then people that are immunocompromised, they should check with their doctor on which one might be best for them. Is that?
Yes, but that's assuming that you'll have a choice. At this point, until we have enough vaccine, it's unlikely that you'll be able to, pick and choose your vaccine.
Well, not to get it. I mean, that right. So that, right now people are just desperate to get whatever they can, but they're essentially the same. There's subtle differences, but overall, the two mRNAs are very similar. But once, and we're going to talk about these other ones on the horizon, the J&J, the Novavax, when they come in with different technologies, different types of vaccine bases, then one might be better suited to another depending on what your issues are. So what's their choice? Check with your doctor. Can you mix and match the vaccines? I've had people that have, they can get the first appointment. They have a hard time getting the second appointment. They've thought about whether or not they should just get whatever they can.
The short answer is no, but give me 1 second, because CBS was just calling me about some story that I'm doing for today here, and he hung up, and let's see if he'll come up. The bosses.
CBS has some nerve butting into my program. Can't believe
actually, the story today.
I'm sorry, I butt dialed you. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. The butt dial.
I love work from home.
Or pocket dial is, I guess, the more politically correct thing to call it.
I call it butt dial. It's easy.
So what else you got?
All right, so we were talking about mix and matching.
While in theory they're the same, the recommendation from the CDC is no, don't mix and match. But if you get your first one, you should be in the queue and have an appointment for your second one from the same manufacturer.
All right.
But
And again, they haven't tested the mix and match, so nobody knows.
yeah, that's exactly. There's so many of these things that we just don't know because, again, it is new and we haven't tested all of the different combinations and permutations that might be out there.
Exactly. Does it matter where you get it? You know, that somehow I'd rather get it in the doctor's office than drive through at the Lord and Taylor parking lot.
Unlikely that it makes a difference. It's such a simple and straightforward. I mean, it's the same as a flu shot or anything else, any other vaccine. It's a little quick jab in the muscle in the arm and done. So, I mean, I would hope that the people administering, you need a little bit of training. So you're not bouncing it off your arm bone or the needle off that or hitting anything vital. You know, there's a certain area that you want to put it in. But aside from that, it really, it does not make a difference.
Okay. And somehow, especially since you have to sit here for 15 minutes, I don't thought I'd double check that. We touched on this a little bit before. Are those who have been vaccinated, are they still contagious? You know, the big news now is that you've been vaccinated, but you still have to wear a mask or 2 or 3. And I had someone say to me the other day that he was still quarantining. He and his wife had gotten their vaccine, but they were still told to quarantine from their family for a couple weeks.
Again,
I know it takes a while for the immune reaction to kick in fully.
Yes, and that's both. That's a two-way street in terms of protection. We're just now getting some data, some evidence. For example, from the I'm pointing over here, like you know what I'm pointing at. I have some of the J&J data here on my desk. That it looks like it helps prevent transmission. So infectiousness
Right.
to
other people.
Right.
So there shouldn't be an issue. If I've gotten my vaccine, I shouldn't have to stay away from my grandchild. I don't have a grandchild yet, but nonetheless, my future grandchild.
Theoretically, no, but again, we're talking about 90%, 95% immunity. So that's not the same as I'm absolutely sure I can't infect my new grandchild.
But again, that's everything. And the whole point on the masks goes back to the schmutz in your nose. And what if I have something in my nose and I sneeze it out? And what if I can sneeze out any of a billion things that happen to be in my nose? So
you must have a nasty nose in there, but
I have
okay.
a great nose. I don't get the cold or the flu. I just don't. Oddly, knock on wood, but.
So the wearing the mask also will protect you until you develop full immunity from people in your family who may have been exposed and don't know it.
Right. Okay. How about the new strains? There's a lot of discussion about whether these things are working on the new strains and will the new strains, and as they keep mutating, are we again chasing our tails on this?
Well, first of all viruses mutate. That's what they do.
Right.
There's nothing unusual about the coronavirus when it comes to mutations or new strains or variants. You know, they're kind of all synonymous terms. Number one, it looks like Moderna and Pfizer are both pretty effective, maybe not a full 95% effective, but highly effective against the UK, the British variant, which is now in this country and
Right.
all over the place. It looks like that's pretty good against that. Though they are pretty good against that. And it also looks like they have reasonable effectiveness against the South Africa strain or variant. And in fact, the J&J data that was just posted today says that the vaccine had an 86% efficacy against severe forms of COVID in the US and 82% against severe disease in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite as high or quite as good. And it doesn't mean that you won't get sick. It means that you won't get sick and die.
Right.
Or have really severe needing to be hospitalized or put on a ventilator type of COVID disease.
Right, which
So-
again is actually the key thing. I mean, again, we all get colds, we all get flus, except me, I don't get them. I just said, I don't. But we don't want to get them so seriously because you talk to the vast majority of people who have had COVID who say I felt a little sick, I felt a little fluish, I was sniffled for a few days. So that it's reducing the serosity of it is huge.
Correct. But to the second part of your question, which is, will we need boosters? Will we need different shots? The jury's out on that.
Mhm.
It's possible if the virus keeps changing enough so that it isn't protective, or so that the vaccine isn't protective
Right.
against something that has now mutated or drifted far enough away from the original. Now, the good news there is that these new platforms, particularly the mRNA vaccines, are very easily and quickly repurposed for new variants.
Right.
So it won't take a year or 6 months or whatever, it'll take 6 weeks
We
maybe.
can adapt it quickly.
And that's actually being done already.
Right.
Pfizer and Moderna are already doing that. I would be surprised if J&J and Novavax and the others aren't figuring out how to do that as well.
And when they adapt it, are they shifting it to the new, or it still now covers the old and the new? So we cover China, and it becomes a global vaccine. We cover China virus, we cover UK virus, we cover, is it able to do all those, or are they just shifting it to the new guy? You love my questions.
Don't know.
Okay, don't know what's there.
I admit that's a good question, and I don't know. The new vaccine, don't know. It depends on how different. It will depend on how different the new one is from the old one as to whether there's enough cross-reactivity. And by the way, speaking of cross-reactivity, there was a paper that it's in preprint, so it hasn't been fully published and vetted yet, from Mayo Clinic, saying that people who have had other vaccines, non-COVID vaccines, polio, they call it geriatric flu, which is a high-dose flu vaccine, Pneumovax, which is for pneumonia, the Hib vaccine, there were a half dozen of them, I don't remember all of them, had a reduced incidence of COVID.
Interesting. Well, everybody's had vaccines, or there are only certain ones.
Yeah, we should have.
But
But-
virtually everybody had all.
But it's another reason to make sure that you're fully vaccinated, because it does look like there's enough crossover that you're training your immune system sort of non-specifically to respond to foreigners. And it looks like it reduces your risk of getting COVID.
Interesting. Are you okay? We've been an hour. Usually these are an hour. Are you okay if we keep going a little bit?
A little bit. I have, believe it or not, yet another webinar that I'm moderating a little bit later.
You're very popular. All right, I'm going to go real quick through this.
Okay.
We've got the new vaccines on the horizon, J&J, the AstraZeneca, the Novavax. Anything in particular, their timing of them, anything in particular to talk about at this moment in time, or let's.
Well, the next one in line looks like it's J&J. That will be evaluated by the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee on Friday. It looks positive. It looks like they will probably vote to recommend its emergency use authorization, which means that the FDA commissioner will likely approve it as early as Saturday. The benefit to that one, to J&J, is that it's one shot,
Right.
not two, although they are looking at 2 shots. They've already started a clinical trial using the same vaccine with 2 doses.
Well, and again, given that their one shot is what 66% or so, so it's significantly lower coverage.
Right. And however, because it uses the virus as the delivery vehicle for the genetics of the coronavirus, they stick it into a human cold virus called an adenovirus, but it's been deactivated essentially, so it can't reproduce. The virus itself, not the corona piece of it, but this adenovirus, this cold virus, also induces a stronger immune response.
Hmm.
So that it in and of itself may actually produce a stronger immune response than just sticking the mRNA in there.
And by
Again,
stronger response, does that mean then longer lasting?
don't know.
Because I don't know
Again,
what stronger means in the context of 95% effective versus 66% effective. I'm not a scientist, but one's bigger than the other.
no dummies here.
Huh?
True. But we don't know whether that means longer lasting, whether that means more T cell immunity versus antibody immunity. All of these things will be investigated up the wazoo for years as we learn more and more about it. But we've learned just a remarkable amount in 1 year on this, or just a little over a year. This has never happened before that we've been able to move this quickly. But again, another important thing to remember is that each one of these vaccines, even though, say, for example, Moderna and Pfizer were essentially the same, but any others coming down the line are different.
Right.
You have to be evaluated differently, have to be evaluated for side effects differently. Its longevity, whether or not it affects infectiousness, ability to stop very severe disease. Every one of those
We're still
is going to be and is different.
right.
And so you cannot say what was true for one will be true for the other.
Yep. And we're still learning. And again, it is phenomenal what they've done. A year ago, we had zero knowledge and it was panic. So really, like, kudos to everybody involved, and, you know, politics aside, everybody along the way. All right, let me do a couple of these quick questions for you. Someone asked about, back to the facial fillers. Is it only recent facial fillers, or if somebody had them long ago, over 5 years ago? Is that?
In some cases, recent for sure. I've heard of them now going back as long as 6 months, 5 years, we don't know. It depends, and we don't know which fillers are more likely to induce this kind of reaction, because there's about 4 different major categories of fillers, and in some, and some of them don't last 5 years. That's why you keep going back every 6 months or once a year to get more. They don't last, and so if it's that long ago and it's one of those that tends to go away, then it's probably unlikely that you'll get that.
Okay. Let's see. Margie had asked about autoimmune conditions. I think we talked about that. She also asked about fertility. We talked about that. Look how good we were. We talked about, Kyle asked about I want everybody to know that I'm seeing their messages. Kyle asked about rapidly mutating viruses. We just talked about the mutating viruses. We talked about herd immunity. Look, we did all these questions. Cancer patients, I think we talked about cancer patients can get.
Yes.
Right.
If not, they probably shouldn't if they are currently getting chemotherapy and perhaps radiation, but chemotherapy, they probably shouldn't right at that time. But if they're in remission, or or they've had it in the past, they're okay to get it.
Right. Okay. And then Kyle asked again about the reactions and deaths. Were there any of those connected to any lines of the vaccines? But we talked about that thus far, there's nothing in particular that's connected to it.
But it's being investigated for sure.
Right. All right. One last question for you. What should our overall expectations be regarding COVID? And of course, I have my answer in my mind because we started out at bend the curve. Suddenly it's no one should ever get sick. And there was something again in the Wall Street Journal today about, in spite of all the mass vaccination in England and the virus is coming down and everything, all the good news that's going on, they're still warning, but we may need to shut down again in the future. So to me, a lot of this is managing the head game. If there's one thing that people have been, it's as not much the COVID as the emotional and psychological. And I just desperately want people to not be afraid of getting out of their house one day. And that we shouldn't live with this, sort of Damocles over our head that we're going to get shut down again. So what do you see, Max, in terms of what should people's expectations be about COVID?
The second thing that you said is the expectation that, it will go away and no one will ever get sick again is unrealistic. That doesn't happen. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
Again, because no vaccine is 100% effective. Not everyone's going to decide to get vaccinated.
Mhm.
So it will probably be with us maybe forever, or until we develop enough of our own sort of inbred immunity to this to where we don't get that sick from it. So the vaccine is important to prevent deaths, prevent serious hospitalization, ventilation, that sort of thing. But there will still be some COVID out there. What we don't know is whether or not we may need a booster in a year, in 5 years, 10 years, whether it will mutate and change enough so that it will require like a flu shot.
Right.
Possibly not, but again, until we get more knowledge about it and until we have a much greater proportion of the population vaccinated, that's why Fauci and others are still saying, keep wearing a mask.
Right.
I mean,
Well, and again, that's his job because the scientist looks in that very specific way where he's accountable for, will people get sick? And he knows that that can always happen. We can always make a little pitch. I told everybody earlier, our immune download, there's still things people can and should be doing on their own to take responsibility. Obviously, if you're older, you can't change your age, but diabetes, get your sugar in control. That will reduce the high risk groups. If you have a weight issue, to get that weight down. There are things we've talked about, vitamin D levels, zinc levels, those deficiencies, D in particular, that makes you very vulnerable. That everybody should be thinking about those things too. What can you do for yourself beyond get the vaccine? I think, right?
Yeah. And you know what, let me just add a little something because it's sort of, this is kind of the scientist in me, but it's an interesting point that people should think of when they're thinking about how viruses are mutating, and people think of these, oh my God, it's going to mutate into, something that'll wipe out the population. Again, viruses normally mutate. That's what they do. They very often mutate in a direction towards being more benign,
right,
than being worse. Most of the mutations are dead ends, meaning the virus, it's not good enough for the virus, and the virus just dies with that mutation. Viruses, if you think of it from an evolution point of view, viruses are trying to find the Goldilocks spot where they're readily transmissible, because that's what their job is to spread.
right.
But not so deadly that you kill the host all the time.
Because then they can't spread. Then their species dies.
Then they can't spread.
Right.
That's why things like Ebola, for example, did not become a worldwide epidemic, because it was so deadly that it burned itself out quickly.
Right.
In the areas where it showed up, obviously, it was devastating, but it didn't become a COVID-19 type of virus, because it was so deadly that there's still a reservoir of it somewhere out there in the wild, so it'll periodically pop up again, but it doesn't become that. So the fact that it mutates doesn't mean necessarily that it doesn't mean that it's going to wipe out the population. But it does mean that we need to stay on top of it, which is the other reason why the US needs to ramp up its genetic sequencing of the virus, so that as these new variants pop up, we know about them beforehand. We're not playing catch up.
Right.
We're trying to stay at least ahead of the virus.
Right. Great. Max, thank you so much. Great information. Thank you for letting me take so much of your time. I know you're busy and in demand.
No, it's my pleasure. This is so important. I'm glad, I want people to hear things that can concern, but not panic.
I think that's so important. Yes.
We're going to be okay.
Thank you, Uncle Max. Right.
You bet.
And everybody, okay, so don't forget tomorrow, come back tomorrow, same bad time, same bad channel, 4 o'clock, so we can talk about happiness and this really very exciting project. The bottom line is launching. And if you have friends that want to know this, you can, this will still be on our Facebook page. So share this. This is really vital information. So many people so confused about it. So it's on our Facebook page. In another few days, we'll put it onto YouTube by the time we have to clean it up a little. But it'll go onto YouTube as well. So Max, thank you, everybody. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Bye-bye.